The man who sees further than the rest will always stand apart, not because he chooses separation, but because the world itself cannot follow where his eyes are fixed. To perceive possibilities and dangers that others are blind to is both a gift and a curse. It grants power, for he can shape events before others even recognize their approach. Yet it also condemns him to solitude, because men despise what unsettles their comfort. They resent the one who points to storms on the horizon when they prefer to dance under clear skies. They distrust the one who speaks of truths that tear apart their illusions. Thus, the visionary becomes both necessary and hated, admired in whispers but abandoned in practice. His difference becomes a wound, for men rarely forgive those who stand above them in foresight. Consider how people cling to habit, as if it were safety itself. The ordinary man finds security in repetition, in customs, in the patterns handed down to him by his fathers. The visionary, however, sees where these customs lead: stagnation, decay, and eventual ruin. He proposes change, not for his pleasure, but for survival and advancement. Yet when he voices it, he becomes a disturber of the peace, a threat to the very foundation of their comfort. To the dull-minded, the visionary is not a savior, but a criminal. They will ridicule him, laugh at him, and brand him arrogant for daring to speak above their level. His foresight, which could save them, instead condemns him in their eyes. The tragedy of vision is that the present cannot yet contain the future. When a man carries in his mind the shape of what is to come, he walks in a world that has not yet been born. He becomes a stranger in his own time, for his thoughts belong to an era that does not exist. The people of his age cannot converse with him fully, for their concerns are too small, their fears too near, their pleasures too cheap. He grows restless among them, just as an eagle grows restless in a cage of sparrows. His words fall upon deaf ears, and the silence that greets his warnings is more painful than open hostility. To see further is to walk alone, for there are few companions on a road not yet built. This isolation deepens when the visionary recognizes that even those closest to him will not understand. Family, friends, and allies may hear his words but not grasp their weight. They may love him, but they will not follow him. Their affection does not bridge the gap created by his foresight. They ask him to be like them, to surrender his burden, to join in their distractions, to laugh at their shallow jokes and share in their fleeting comforts. Yet he cannot. The vision burns in him like fire, and fire does not rest. He carries it in silence, knowing that to explain it too much would only draw more mockery, more suspicion, and more rejection. The loneliness that follows is not chosen but forced, and the visionary endures it not out of preference but out of necessity. In this exile of the spirit, he discovers the first law of vision. The further a man sees, the fewer will walk beside him. To lead is not to be embraced, but to be set apart. The crowd may one day follow, but only after the path is clear, after the risk is gone, after the visionary has already suffered the wounds of their disbelief. Until then, he remains alone, carrying a truth too heavy for those who prefer to be blind. Every visionary carries with him a shadow, and that shadow is misunderstanding. It clings to him, not because his words are false, but because his words pierce too deep for the common ear. Men hear him speak, but they twist his meaning, for they lack the capacity to see beyond their own narrow judgments. What he offers as wisdom is taken as arrogance. What he presents as warning is dismissed as fear. Mongering and what he speaks as truth is branded a lie. Misunderstanding becomes his constant companion, for men rarely judge according to truth. They judge according to their own weakness. And when confronted with a man whose vision outstrips their own, they prefer to diminish him rather than confront their inadequacy. It is a cruel burden, for it strikes from every direction. The crowd misunderstands because they are blind. The ambitious misunderstand because they are envious. Even allies misunderstand because they are impatient. When the visionary speaks of long-term sacrifice, they call him ruthless. When he insists on silence where others demand action, they call him cowardly. When he pushes for action where others seek delay, they call him reckless. His words, which spring from foresight, are turned into weapons against him. For men do not measure his intent, they measure only their discomfort. It is easier to brand him a fool or a madman than to accept that his vision reveals their ignorance. Thus, the very clarity that elevates him becomes the cause of his isolation. Misunderstanding does more than wound. It corrodes trust. Those who should stand beside him hesitate, for they do not fully grasp his direction. They begin to suspect motives that do not exist, to imagine selfishness where there is only necessity. The visionary finds himself constantly accused, constantly forced to justify what cannot yet be proven. And proof, in the eyes of the masses, only arrives when success is already visible. Until that moment, every warning is paranoia, every strategy is overcomplication, every demand is tyranny. The visionary must therefore endure being painted as a villain, even when his work is to protect and elevate the very people who condemn him. The burden is not that he is wrong, but that he is right too soon. This burden isolates him further than mere solitude. For solitude can be endured in silence, but misunderstanding twists even silence into suspicion. If he withdraws, they whisper he is plotting. If he speaks, they accuse him of manipulation. If he succeeds, they call him lucky. If he fails, they call him a fraud. His intentions are never seen as they are, for men rarely see beyond the mask they have placed upon him. And the greater his vision, the heavier the mask becomes. He is condemned to live not only with the truth of his foresight, but also with the falsehoods that others construct around him. Yet misunderstanding is inevitable, because vision demands a language the masses cannot yet understand. When a man speaks of what lies decades ahead, those bound by the present can only laugh. When he explains the price of power, those drunk on comfort can only recoil. When he speaks of dangers unseen, those intoxicated by security can only mock. The burden of misunderstanding is therefore not a temporary trial, but a permanent condition of greatness. The visionary is judged not for who he is, but for how his existence unsettles others. And so he walks beneath the weight of distortion, carrying truths that cannot yet be spoken plainly, enduring accusations that will not cease until the world finally arrives at the future he had already foreseen. There is no path to power, to mastery, to true greatness, that does not pass through the desert of solitude. The man of vision must walk alone, not because he despises the company of others, but because the company of others weakens him when he is in the process of becoming something more. The multitude lives for distraction. They cannot sit in silence with themselves, for silence forces them to confront the smallness of their lives. But the visionary must not only endure silence, he must be sharpened by it. In the absence of chatter and the endless noise of the crowd, his thoughts grow dangerous, precise, and unyielding. Solitude is not an ornament of greatness. It is its condition, its training ground, the forge where the iron of will is hardened. The weakness of most men is that they cannot stand to be left alone with their own minds. They chase companionship, entertainment, and applause, thinking these things will bring them strength, yet they only dilute the edge of the spirit. The visionary must accept the opposite. He must learn to feed on his own company, to wrestle with his own doubts, to confront his own demons without escape. In this, solitude becomes a crucible. It strips him of illusions, for when one is alone, there is no one to flatter, no one to deceive, no audience to play for. Alone, he stands naked before the truth of his own mind, forced either to master it or be consumed by it. It is in this condition that the visionary grows into something beyond the reach of ordinary men, for solitude teaches discipline. There is no one to pull him forward, no one to remind him of his purpose, no one to applaud his progress. He must summon these forces from within himself. Each morning of silence tests his will. Each evening of emptiness asks whether he can endure another day without recognition, without applause, without companionship. If he breaks, he returns to the crowd as one of them. If he endures, he emerges stronger than all of them. Solitude, then, is not punishment, it is purification, yet the pain of solitude is real, and it is cruel. The visionary may feel abandoned, he may feel the sting of rejection, he may feel as though the world has conspired to forget him. But he must not flee from this pain, for it is the very fire that shapes him. Every great work demands a period where its creator is unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged. Crops grow underground before they rise to the surface. The tree roots itself in darkness before it bursts into light. So too must the visionary root himself in loneliness, drawing strength from a soil that others are too weak to endure. Only in this dark season does he learn the patience, the endurance, and the unbreakable resolve that greatness demands. In solitude, he also gains what the noisy crowd can never acquire: clarity. Distraction blinds, constant voices confuse, and endless companionship weakens the edge of thought. Alone, he learns to listen to his own mind as a general listens to the whispers of scouts in enemy territory. He learns to detect weaknesses in his own thinking, to sharpen strategies without interference, to plot paths without the dilution of others' fears. His solitude becomes his stronghold, a fortress where he builds himself in secret, while the crowd wastes itself in frivolity. And when the time comes to act, the one who has endured solitude steps forth with a force that appears sudden to the world, though it has been prepared for years in silent loneliness, though bitter in taste, conceals within it a power that few ever learn to wield. Most men see it only as suffering, as an affliction to be escaped, and thus they miss the treasure buried within it. The visionary, however, if he can endure its sting without surrendering to despair, discovers that loneliness is not merely a punishment, but a weapon. For in the absence of constant voices, the mind sharpens. In the absence of flattery, the will hardens. In the absence of distraction, the spirit grows alert. What appears as emptiness to others becomes to him a secret arsenal. Loneliness deprives him of comfort, but in return it grants him the kind of strength that comfort can never give. When a man is surrounded by others, his strength is constantly spent in small ways, defending his reputation, responding to criticism, indulging in trivial conversations, seeking approval. In loneliness, all these demands vanish. What remains is a vast silence, and within that silence the visionary discovers time, the rarest currency of all. He is no longer a slave to the noise of others. He becomes master of his own hours. While the crowd exhausts itself in endless exchanges of meaningless words, he uses his solitude to plan, to calculate, to build. Every hour of loneliness becomes an hour of secret accumulation. By the time the world notices him again, he has stored a fortune of insight, a treasury of strategies, a reservoir of strength. Loneliness also protects him. The crowd is easily swayed, easily stirred to envy, and quick to destroy what it does not understand. But the one who works in silence is spared from premature attacks. Hidden from their gaze, he grows unnoticed, like a shadow in the corner of a room, preparing his moment. The crowd may mock his absence, they may laugh at his seclusion, but in truth they have saved him from their interference. Their ignorance becomes his shield. In the cover of loneliness, he is free to make mistakes without ridicule, to experiment without resistance, to shape himself without interruption. When he finally emerges, he does so not half, formed and vulnerable, but complete, like a blade that has been sharpened in secret. There is also a psychological advantage that loneliness bestows upon the strong. A man who has grown used to silence, who has taught himself to live without applause, becomes immune to manipulation. The promises of flattery no longer seduce him, for he has learned to survive without them. The threats of isolation no longer weaken him, for he has already endured worse. He becomes unbreakable in spirit, a fortress against the pressures that shatter ordinary men. While others panic at the thought of losing favor, he stands unmoved, for he has already lived without it. His loneliness has made him untouchable, and this untouchability becomes his true power. To those who cannot see, loneliness appears as weakness. They mistake absence for insignificance and silence for defeat. But the visionary knows that this absence is only the mask of preparation. He knows that silence is the loudest form of strategy. And while others squander themselves in the illusion of togetherness, he forges himself into something that needs no applause, no companionship, no approval to endure. There is no shortage of men who dream of greatness, who imagine themselves as leaders, conquerors, or thinkers whose names will echo through time. Yet most of them vanish into obscurity, not because they lacked ambition, but because they lacked endurance. The path of vision demands solitude, demands misunderstanding, demands the crucible of loneliness. It tests whether a man can stand alone when the world turns its back on him, whether he can hold his course when all voices call him a fool. Those who cannot endure this weight betray their own promise. They surrender their vision in exchange for comfort. They abandon their pursuit in exchange for acceptance. And in doing so, they condemn themselves to ordinariness. The masses are always eager to welcome back the visionary who has abandoned his vision. They receive him with smiles, with the warmth of companionship, with the relief of sameness. They praise him for returning to reality, but in truth, they only celebrate his defeat. For a man who sees further is a threat to them, but a man who has forsaken his foresight is harmless. He becomes one of them again, and in that transformation he is no longer feared but pitied. To the crowd, there is no greater comfort than seeing a man of promise reduced to mediocrity. It reassures them that their own cowardice was wisdom, that their own blindness was safety. Thus the man who cannot endure becomes not only forgotten, but also used as proof that vision itself is folly. History is littered with such broken men, those who glimpsed a higher path, but could not walk it to the end. They speak of what might have been, of what they once dreamed, of the great work they began but abandoned. Their words drip with regret, though they clothe it in excuses. They blame the cruelty of others, the unfairness of fate, the difficulty of circumstances. But beneath these excuses lies a single truth. They could not carry the loneliness required of them. They lacked the stomach for exile, the endurance for silence, the will to face themselves without distraction. In failing this test, they prove that their vision was never strong enough to deserve reality. The fate of such men is always the same. They live lives that appear comfortable but are inwardly haunted. They join the crowd, but they never truly belong to it again, for once a man has seen beyond, he cannot unsee. His days are filled with small pleasures, but his nights are filled with torment, for he knows what he abandoned. He claps for others who succeed, but within him burns the quiet rage of his own surrender. This is the punishment reserved for those who cannot endure, not only obscurity, but the endless memory of what they might have been. And yet this fate is common because endurance is rare. It is easy to desire greatness when surrounded by applause, but the desire withers in the long winters of silence. It is easy to believe in vision when others believe with you, but belief collapses when you are the last man standing. Only those who embrace loneliness without compromise, only those who turn their suffering into steel, ascend beyond this fate. The rest fall back into the crowd, swallowed by the mass of the forgotten, their names erased, their dreams dissolved, their vision buried in the comfort they chose over the pain that would have delivered them. The path of the visionary is not paved with comfort, nor is it lit with the torches of admiration. It is a road of exile, of misunderstanding, of silence so heavy it can break the spirit of lesser men. To see beyond others is to walk alone, to be doubted, ridiculed, and left in the shadows while the crowd clings to their illusions. Yet in this exile lies the true test of power. Loneliness, though bitter, sharpens the mind and hardens the will. Misunderstanding, though painful, frees the visionary from the chains of approval. Solitude, though cruel, grants him the strength to endure without applause. And endurance itself becomes the dividing line between the forgotten and the immortal. Most men, when faced with this weight, collapse and return to the crowd, where their names dissolve into nothing. But the few who accept the burden, who endure the cold silence without compromise, ascend beyond the reach of ordinary life. They emerge from solitude with a strength that cannot be bought, with a vision that cannot be denied, and with a power that history cannot erase. The loneliness of the visionary is not a curse to be escaped. It is the crucible through which greatness is forged. Only those who endure it without surrender rise to become the architects of destiny, while the rest remain buried in the dust of the ordinary.